Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. We're going to start off today's show by discussing Donald Trump's decision to enact travel restrictions on Europeans coming into the United States. A very wide-ranging restrictions, that is, pretty much the entire Schengen area, except for very few exceptions, such as U.S. citizens themselves, certainly. And he's interestingly not included the U.K. within all of this. This certainly all coming because of coronavirus and the fears about that at this time. It is spreading throughout the United States as well, and many public health officials who have then questioned, whether or not this move will really do anything beyond just save face for Donald Trump at this time, because it's already in the U.S., so it's a bit late for such restrictions on travel. If it's already there now, it's certainly a question of containing this virus to the extent that is possible. Let's discuss that further. We're now joined by Nina Burleigh, who is a political analyst, widely published political journalist, and best-selling author. She's joining us now from New York. And we're joined by Jim Williams as well, who is a 7-time Emmy Award-winning journalist. He's Washington Bureau Chief of LJC Media and Genesis Communications. He's joining us from Washington. Jim and Nina, good morning to you both, and thank you for joining us. Nina, let me start with you. What do you make of this decision on these travel restrictions? You may have heard already that he has exempted nations where 3 of his own golf resorts, interestingly, are located as well. Do you think that's just purely by fluke, or is this almost a decision to try not to hurt his own businesses as well at the same time?
Well, I usually don't put anything past Trump or the Trump family in terms of self-interest, but in this case, I'm not sure that is the only reason that they would exempt the UK. I think maybe they have some other reasons for doing that maybe has to do with their relationships with the UK, or I don't know. I maybe the numbers in the UK were less. I find it hard to believe that they would have actually done that. I mean, I think possibly he has some kind of personal affection for that part of the world, given that his mother came from there. Yeah. But I don't think that it would be strictly because of the golf courses.
And so do you think it was smart for him to...
Maybe giving him too much of a break here.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Do you think it was smart of him, though, to exempt the UK at this time? I mean, considering the fact that, there's a question mark on whether such a policy was even needed at this time, but even if we see the logic of it, why exempt the UK to begin with? Is it just politics? Is it him trying to support Boris? I mean, what is your hypothesis on that, do you think?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's I don't think it's necessarily a smart thing to do, and I'm baffled by it. I don't think that there doesn't seem to be any medical reason for it.
Jim, what are your thoughts on this? Because it's certainly not made the European Union very happy, especially because this wasn't done in coordination with them. Even EU diplomats in Washington, D.C. seemingly were caught off guard by this announcement.
Well, I think without question, it was, let's say in a word, stupid. Basically, it really didn't make any sense, because you can get to the UK by any flight in Europe and then come. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. The problem, too, is here in the United States, we're finding out that travel within the United States is actually some of the places in which the virus is being transmitted. So, for instance, the National Basketball Association was canceled all of their games for the moment. The reason they're self-containing is because of 2 Utah Jazz players tested positive, and then flights, charter flights on those same planes used by the Utah Jazz were used then by different teams, and they've all been self-quarantined. So it's really the travel within the United States right now that's more alarming than, frankly, people coming in and out from outside the borders.
Indeed. How do you assess how Trump has done so far when it comes to dealing with the coronavirus?
He's missed the mark terribly. I mean, this was an opportunity. He couldn't cause this, okay? This is an opportunity where he could have stepped up. He could have said, you know what? We as Americans need to work together. We have a problem, okay? I'm going to declare it a national disaster. We are going to get the funds out there. We are going to be proactive here. We're going to get the tests here as quickly as possible. And we are going to lead the world in doing our best to solve this problem. That is not what he did. For a long time, he didn't even acknowledge it was a problem. He has mismessaged where he's gone out and done and said things that have been counterproductive to the vice president, who has been doing daily briefings, all of which said constantly, don't shake hands, don't, be very careful when you're near in someone's space, right? The whole routine. The president, meanwhile, is out there saying, go ahead, shake hands. If you don't feel a little bad, go to work anyway. It's only like the flu. It makes no sense because, again, it's a missed opportunity. He could have stepped up, looked good, probably caused less of a panic in the stock market, and all of this is self-inflicted wounds. So I don't understand. I mean, it was an opportunity to step up and be statesmanlike and prove that, he really is a leader, and yet it was like, not to see here until and I think really the real key point here is that the United States businesses have stepped up.
Yeah.
They themselves are taking the lead and doing it without the government telling it. When you look at the NBA, the NHL, and the sports leagues just alone, that's billions of dollars.
Indeed.
And they're leaving on the table, but they're stepping away. So, no, I don't think they did a good job at all.
Nina, back in. What do you make of the kind of leadership or lack of that Donald Trump has shown throughout this? I mean, as Jim there had alluded to, as a president, I imagine it's very tough to try to find that balance between not creating public panic over a virus, even if the details are looking all bad, and at the same time warning people in a rational fashion.
Yeah, I mean, the whole rollout of this thing is really classic Trump. The Trump method, the Trump politics is really based in perception being more important than reality. It's all about PR. It's all about cheerleading. It's all about making America feel good. That's what he thinks he's doing. And this is a crisis. It's a real crisis. It's the first major crisis he's had to deal with. He's been very lucky. He hasn't had to deal with anything serious, and the instinct is to downplay and to make people feel good, and that is exactly what the propaganda arm of the right-wing media, they followed in lockstep right away. And you had Fox, and I think you still have Rush Limbaugh. I mean, I was yesterday picking up a kid from college here in New York, and I heard Rush Limbaugh, who's a major right-wing broadcaster here with 15 million weekly listeners, telling people that it was nothing worse than the flu and that panic was a Democrat-led attack on the great Trump economy. So, Trump was really playing straight out of his own playbook in the early days. And then, of course, I think what happened was they started to see what was happening in Italy. And he started to, the people who really pay attention, who are science-based, finally got through to the people in the White House who can force him to listen to them, which is probably Jared Kushner. And then they had Stephen Miller write up that speech, and Kushner massaged it, and then he read that thing off. But he's still, right now it's not even light in Washington, D.C. And this morning he's tweeting, blaming the CDC testing problems on Obama. So, it's all politicized. And it couldn't be, a worse situation, really, when, a country, this country of 300 and some million people who need leadership and need science-based information.
Indeed. And
the fact that they have not done the tests is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Jim, before I let you both go, I wanted to ask you, Jim, just what do you make of what's about to come? Because as all of us know, rationally speaking, the numbers are going to spike, right? Very, very soon. We don't know when the peak will be in a country as large, of course, as the US, but they are going to increase significantly once testing is done more widely. Hopefully that will begin ASAP, although we don't know exactly when. Do you think that Trump will be able to just tighten his belt and say, okay, let's get this work done?
I think they'll try, but to Nina's point, he's thus far proven incapable of being able to tell people bad news. It's just something he can't do. And he's not necessarily very good at calming people. But that being said, I think that if we start to see the Pelosi and McConnell, Mitch McConnell leading the Senate, Nancy Pelosi, of course, the Speaker of the House, if they can come together and create some bills and get some things out there, which helps to protect people and stimulate the economy, at the same time we start ramping up the testing, I think people will at least become calm, even though, as we all know, as you just said, the numbers are going to go up. So right now, it's can we keep the American people calm? You and I talked earlier before we came on air about the fact that my wife at 4:30 this morning was out shopping to try to make sure that we could get food. That is the kind of situation we're now in because people just don't know. And when you don't know something, you tend to go to the worst place. And I think right now, we just need calm.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that with Jim and Nina. Appreciate both of your time this morning and giving us the viewpoint from there in the U.S. Viewers, I'll be back right after this break, continuing the discussion on coronavirus and how Donald Trump is reacting to it. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. We're continuing to discuss Donald Trump's decision to enact that travel restriction on European countries, especially those in the Schengen area, except, of course, the UK and Ireland. Let's discuss this further. We're now joined by Valerio Alfonso Bruno, who is a senior research fellow at the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right. He's joining us now from Napoli in Italy. And joining us from London is Patrick Basham, who is the founding director of the Democracy Institute. Patrick and Valerio, thank you both for your time today. Patrick, let me start with you. You're in London right now, so I'm wondering, what are people around you saying about the fact that London's been, or the UK essentially has been exempted? I imagine there's a sigh of relief to an extent.
A combination of relief and puzzlement, bewilderment. People are recognizing that the UK has dodged an economic bullet, dodged a logistical bullet in not being included in the ban, at least not so far. But of course, also many people here are not, the default position is not to tend to sympathize with President Trump or support his decisions. So there's a great deal of puzzlement, even criticism that the UK has not been included with the other 26 European nations, I believe. But there's a recognition that the decision to ban travel from Europe could be expanded to include the UK and Ireland. So that shoe may yet drop in the coming days or weeks.
Indeed. And Valerio, you're in the midst of it right now, especially in Italy. Tell us what your thoughts are when you heard about, the sort of travel restrictions that Donald Trump has brought in now.
It may result unpopular what I'm saying, but I think Trump did right because you have to act quickly right now. He made two mistakes. He should have included the UK and Ireland, at least try to agree few hours, one day earlier with the European authorities. But practically speaking, I think he did right, because right now you cannot wait anymore. You cannot be, wait and see what's going to happen. So unfortunately, what I can say from the Italian experience, that the earlier you lock down everything and you cut transportation, you cut shops, included the connection with other country, the better it is.
Okay, so Patrick, on that point then, you think that travel restrictions were needed? Because, there's one argument from a lot of health officials who are saying this is too late, like the virus is already in the US, it's being spread within communities now. So right now, the president should actually just be concentrating on what's happening within.
Well, technically, the scientists are correct. The virus is already in the US. But it's a question, I mean, one can argue this both ways, obviously, but it's a question of what one can do to minimize the exposure and the spread. So, for example, several weeks ago when President Trump banned travel from China and Iran, that was criticized both domestically and internationally. Public health experts now say that while that didn't prevent the virus from reaching the United States, it did prevent the maximum exposure that was possible and has helped reduce the level of exposure and consequently the amount of spread. So what I think we're going to see with the ban on the European countries is, again, a reduction in what the exposure would have been. So it's not a question of this being a silver bullet or a panacea that is going to solve the problem or inoculate the United States, as it were. But I think it is a reasonable measure. The question is, an outstanding question, I think, is not whether the ban is necessary, but whether the ban should be expanded to the UK and Ireland and perhaps other countries as well.
Okay, so tell us, Valerio, within Italy at this point in time, and even within the EU, as I put to you, the EU countries and the EU officials are quite angry about this because, as you had alluded to as well, there was no coordination with European countries at this time. And in fact, Donald Trump seems to be playing politics at this time. In his statement announcing these travel restrictions, he blamed Europe for not doing enough and not for locking down and for implementing measures which even the U.S., mind you, within the country has not actually implemented. How bad will this be, do you think, for relations between the two sides? Because at some point, coronavirus will end, and they'll have to move on and have travel back and forth again and trade and other relations. I mean, this is not very positive for good relations, is it?
I agree with you. You're right. I mean, Trump is playing politics again, divide et impera, European countries, and on the other side, UK. So, as you said, it's really politics, and now should not be the time to politics because the coronavirus is really spreading and killing people. The problem is that also within the European Union, we were having a lot of issues like lack of coordination. Yesterday, Christine Lagarde failed completely to try to reassure the markets. We had the Italian financial market most negative session in history, minus 17%. Also, the European Commission is waiting and seeing. I think this is really the time when the European Union and its institutions should do more, but there is no coordination. Germany say that gradually they will close schools and university. On the other side, we have countries like France. They say, okay, we will close school and university, but since Monday, starting from next Monday. And then also they will keep this regional election going on at the end of the month, which is really not understandable because of the spreading of the virus. So really, I'm not even talking about the UK because a few days ago we had football matches in the UK with people in the stadium. They are not closing schools, university, even if the scientific evidences are there. Really, there is confusion. Every country is acting in a different way. So it's a big delusion from the perspective of the European Union. I'm really sorry to say that, but it's true. So I'm not surprised that Trump is once again playing politics against the European Union because effectively speaking, we allow that. We are so weak.
Do you think that there's been enough coordination between European countries? Because, I mean, Italy, to its credit, has to an extent been able to, lock down and, control this situation. Giuseppe Conte was able to make that very tough decision. I'm sure it wasn't easy for him. From what I've understood, pharmacies and food stores are still open so that people are able to access both medicines and food. But do you think that within the European bloc, too, there's been able to be enough coordination to work together to defeat the virus?
Till now, there was no coordination at all. I'm sorry to say, but complete failure from the side of the European institutions. So each country, for economic reasons, for political calculus with the leaders, they are trying to deal with the outbreak, but the countermeasures are too soft. They are not being implemented quickly enough. Right now, this kind of institution, like in Brussels, they should act, like a network to let the member states, member countries be more coordinated. But so far, there was no coordination, no help to Italy from other countries. The only help we had so far came from China, which is paradoxically because they are dealing with this huge outbreak. Okay, now it's going better in China, but they were the only country so far sending us, equipment. They even sent to us like 9 medical doctors to try to cope with the outbreak in Italy, scientists. So we appreciate their help, but from other countries, there is even a problem with the masks to protect ourselves. They were not sent to us because France and Germany said, okay, we will need it. So I'm sorry, we cannot sell it to other countries, not even to Italy. So this is a lot of egoism. And really, our president of the Italian Republic yesterday, Sergio Mattarella, which is a strong Europeist, he said he was surprised of the lack of support from the European institution, which really came as a shock to Italy because no one was expecting our president to say we have no help from Europe right now.
Okay, we'll leave there as a final word, but of course we appreciate Valerio and Patrick for their time today. As we've spoken to all four of our guests, the feeling that we've gotten is that everyone's been caught off guard, right, by this. And that's understandable to an extent. As Patrick there said, it's hard to know what you're planning for, even if you're supposed to forecast for these sorts of things and have emergency measures in place. However, everyone's just taken so long to react, and then there's lack of unity, be it within just Europe or between Europe and the United States, with these countries which all claim to be allies at all points in time, yet they're not working together for some odd reason. There are travel restrictions now in place for Europe. I mean, in the sense that, sure, it makes one feel good. I'm sure it makes Americans feel good. But as a lot of health officials are saying, it's already too late. Donald Trump, if he wanted to act in this fashion, should have done so ages ago when the virus had first appeared in Europe, so that it would not have appeared in the U.S. to begin with. Now that it's already there, it's about really controlling it as much as possible within U.S. borders. And then, as Valerio described, within Europe itself, there are issues of just divisions within the European bloc itself, and the countries not really helping each other, countries that claim that the European bloc is strong and that unity and working together, that those are concepts which Europe holds dear. That, again, is not something that we're seeing play out in front of our eyes at this time. We'll keep a close eye, of course, on coronavirus as that continues to spread worldwide, really, and we see different countries and regions reacting to that. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, as panic over coronavirus spreads around the world, there seems to be another front opening up again in the Middle East between the U.S. and Iran, specifically in Iraq at this point in time. But in that regard, we've had the U.S. House of Representatives as well as the Senate pass a war powers resolution which limits Donald Trump's power to be able to go to war with Iran. This all stems from the U.S. decision to assassinate Qasem Soleimani as well as others on Iraqi soil not too long ago, a few months ago. And we know that the tensions that brought up to the fore with the Iranian retaliation on U.S. troops in Iraq as well. Iraq, again, very much the theater of this back and forth between the U.S. and Iran. We've now had this attack on Camp Taji as well, this rocket attack, and then retaliation by the U.S. on what it's calling Iran-backed militias. Even an airport in the city of Karbala in Iraq has been hit as well by the U.S. So things seem to be heating up again, and not a lot of the world's eyes seem to be on that at this point in time. Let's discuss that further and the implications, of course, of these tensions once again ratcheting it up. We're joined now by Barbara Benitez, who is assistant professor of George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. She's joining us now from Washington, D.C. Joining us also from D.C. is Reza Khanzadeh, who is a research fellow at Sharif University think tank and a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford. And joining us from Miami is Glenn Alexander Crowther, who is a visiting research professor at Florida International University. Glenn, Reza, and Barbara, thank you to all three of you for your time this morning. Reza, let me start with you. How important was this resolution to be passed? Certainly, Donald Trump will veto it when it comes to his table, but nevertheless, it seems bipartisan agreement, seemingly, on wanting Trump to be limited and controlled in some way when it comes to Iran.
Right, and bipartisan, that term used very loosely, I believe, because you had 6 Democrats vote against, but then also 6 Republicans vote for. So But it is very important. You are correct, because I believe with the way Trump's foreign policy has been moving forward in the past almost 4 years now, you see this type of rhetoric that does kind of point or hint towards war and escalation, but then almost immediately, or maybe a few days, a few weeks after, he kind of pulls back. But that kind of erratic approach to foreign policy, especially when there's multiple actors, that is it's too scary of a I guess scenario, so to speak, to allow him to have that kind of free reign, if you will. So passing this resolution, I do believe, was a major step forward in a very positive direction, and not just for him and his presidency, but also future presidents to come.
Glenn, what are your thoughts about this? Because for Donald Trump or any president really in the U.S. or around the world, really, a commander-in-chief needs to have that right to be able to defend his or her homeland or interest, right? But at the same time, if we look at the timeline of how these tensions, or the most recent tensions with Iran, ratcheted up, it all begun with the U.S. essentially first walking away from the nuclear deal, and then it making the decision to assassinate Qasem Soleimani on Iraqi soil. Do you think that Trump may have just stepped too far, and even the U.S. establishment may, to an extent, realize that he needs to be reined in?
Well, I see this mainly as an attempt by Congress to claw back their power that was provided to them in the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 8, they're the ones who have to provide for making war. And so Johnson in Vietnam got us in deep. And so in 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution, and it essentially says that the president can take steps to defend the country, but has to report to Congress within 48 hours. And they only have 60 days to complete the mission if they don't get approval from Congress. So this is well within our legal existing framework within the United States. Congress has been almost supine in allowing presidents to use force abroad without their approval.
You know, Barbara, when it came to justification for the Soleimani assassination, I'll go back to that because that's where, you know, these most recent tensions ratcheted up from. You know, the Trump administration wasn't seemingly able to give enough of a satisfactory explanation for why he felt he was justified in doing that. What do you make of that?
Well, that's right, and they've gone back and forth, and they haven't come with a clear reasoning, even though they're claiming imminent threat, as we all know. They haven't been able to prove an imminent threat, and it was just last week, I believe, the end of February, that the House had called Mike Pompeo before it to discuss this, and even he had a belligerent attitude. He skirted around. So this was pretty much one of the reasons that they pressed ahead with this vote. It was bipartisan, although it wasn't an overwhelming majority. There were still some that voted against it. And as you mentioned, this is going to go before the White House. He's expected to veto, and it's unlikely that it would even become law. So we've seen tensions continue, even with yesterday, and it remains to be seen if this is going to even hold any teeth.
Indeed. So then, Reza, should we all be worried? Because, you know, when Soleimani was assassinated, a lot of the world was saying, okay, we're now really at the brink of war. There's going to be World War III, right? That's what a lot of people were saying. And others were saying, no, that's not going to happen. However, that was the initial fear on many people's part. Do you think that we're pushing sort of that red line once again at this time?
Unfortunately, I do. But then again, I was in Iran when Soleimani was assassinated. I was in Tehran, and being a research fellow at one of the major universities in Tehran, if not the country, and kind of having that access or that, you know, comings and goings with students and professors and, you know, members of the, you know, public policy world in Iran, that fear didn't really exist compared to the kind of conversations I was hearing or watching back in America or in Europe. So it's kind of tough to say But given the 40 plus years now of the type of tense relationship U.S. and Iran has had, or particularly Washington and Tehran have had, there is still a cause for concern and for fear that this may lead to war. And once again, going back to our previous conversation, given the fact that Trump has had this type of foreign policy where they call it maximum pressure, but you still don't know from one day to the next what kind of approach he will take with his foreign policy. Looking at North Korea, for example, but even with Iran. So yeah, there is some fear. But again, in Iran, I didn't see it that much back in January.
Okay, so then, Glenn, let's for a moment, if you can, what your thoughts are about, this maximum pressure campaign, right, as the Trump administration has termed it, on Iran. Do you think it's succeeded?
I think that Trump believes he's gaining his objectives through this maximum pressure campaign. That's why I don't feel that there's going to be a war. Honestly, the targeted killing of Soleimani was part of that. If you look at the State Department website, it connects him with the deaths of over 600 American soldiers during the intervention in Iraq. So I don't think we're going to have any problems. We're going to have maximum pressure and some amount of violence around the edges. Maybe Iranian boats bothering American ships, things like that. I think you'll see a lot of nibbling around the edges, but I don't see a war. I see Trump as believing he's gaining his objectives.
But then I wonder, Barbara, there's only so much that you can poke and poke and poke before somebody reacts, right?
And this is true. We've seen this playing out with the soldiers in Iraq who have been subjected to barrages of attacks. I see this continuing more of a tit-for-tat than an all-out war. The closest, I would say, that it got, it was the fear back last summer when the drone attack, when the drone was shot down by the Iranians. There was a fear that there would be this harsh retaliation. At the time, Bolton was pressing for that, but Trump held back. So it was kind of surprising when he all-out went after Soleimani. That was probably one of the moments where there was that question of, wow, could this truly lead to a war? But I think moving forward, we're just going to see a lot of pretty much tit-for-tat, if you want to call it that, of what we've been seeing, an attack on U.S. soldiers based in Iraq, a retaliatory strike. Will it lead to a bigger conflict? I don't believe it will, because this administration is well aware that that would not be an easy feat. As much as it may sound to, especially in Trump's mind, there are a lot of players within the Middle East that press back and pretty much help contain it during this last issue with the killing of General Soleimani.
Very well, Reza, I'll give you the final word. Just tell us, Reza, at this point, maximum pressure campaign, the goal of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was to bring Iran almost back to the negotiating table to be able to renegotiate, in some ways, a new deal, right, which would include then ballistic missiles as well as Iran's role in the region, etc. Have you gotten a feeling that in Iran, anyone at this point in time is willing to actually sit at a table with the U.S.?
No, absolutely not, which for me is alarming, because I was from a distance involved in the very early stages of those negotiations for the JCPOA, and going back and forth to and from Iran, and now seeing that even those that did support Rouhani and Zarif in those negotiations, those that did support this type of de-thawing of tension between Washington and Tehran, now joining the far right, if you will, in Tehran, or the conservatives, and coming out publicly almost and stating that we do not want to renegotiate or go back to the table, if you will, and have another discussion for what some people are saying a JCPOA 2.0. But yeah, it's there does not seem to be any positive light there in Iran as far as, speaking to Washington again.
Okay.
But then again, on the other side, there could be a possibility depending on what happens after November.
Indeed. Well, we'll leave it there at that, but of course we appreciate all of our guests speaking to us there, Barbara, Reza, and Glenn, for their time this morning and for giving us their insight on this worrying topic, really, isn't it? Because as I put to our guests, we always seem to go to the brink when it comes to U.S. and Iran relations and whether or not there's going to be an escalation in that regard. I mean, the Soleimani assassination was probably as close to the red line as one could get for Iran's side, and Iran did retaliate. However, it was a fairly measured, arguably even muted retaliation in some regards, but it seems that both sides are not willing to let this entire issue go, right? As I put to Glenn as well, this all started with the U.S. essentially walking away from the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which was hard fought, mind you, by both sides, arguably as well. And at the same time now, Donald Trump expecting in some way that through this maximum pressure campaign, Iran will be willing to now negotiate with the U.S. when the U.S. has, in the Iranians' eyes at least, proven that it cannot be trusted. Because if one president negotiates something, who's to say that the next president will even respect such an agreement or deal? That, of course, does not point towards stability in the region at all, especially between these two countries. And that, too, all of this playing out on Iraqi soil with the Iraqis repeatedly saying, we don't want to be a part of this. We'll keep a close eye on that, of course, here in Scope. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.